Welcome to the channel. I am the Script Doctor, and in this video, I'm going to rewrite an outline for X-Men Dark Phoenix, addressing the flaws of the film and flesh out our main character and give this movie a solid structure to follow. If you haven't seen my analysis of Dark Phoenix, I'll have a link to that video in the description below. With that being said, let's rewrite X-Men Dark Phoenix. I will be basing this rewrite off of the movie released June 7th, 2019. I'm going to treat this rewrite like any other rewrite and work as if there's no other source material to draw from other than this movie, meaning anything I add will have to be made up based on information from this movie or things I could find in society at the time of this recording. That means no X-Men comic books, TV shows, or other movies will be drawn on for this script. However, there may be similarities, and if there are, please point them out in the comments because it's pretty neat when one writer can stumble on to the same ideas of another. Let's set up our basics. We'll start by getting rid of that voiceover. It doesn't add anything to the story, and if voiceover isn't going to be a recurring element in your script, then there's no point in using it at all. Since voiceover doesn't return in the actual film, I'm going to toss that right away. Next, we have a scene that takes place in 1975. But after this scene, the movie takes place in 1992, and if you watched my take on X-Men Dark Phoenix before, you'll remember that this teaser is broken up and shown throughout the movie multiple times. No repetition unless it adds something more to the story or the character, and so I will cut that as well. This also allows the movie to no longer have an unnecessary time jump, so that is an added bonus. While the movie is advertised as an action sci-fi film, the story feels far more on the dramatic side. With that in mind, what I am going to do is start with emotion and conflict, and I'll keep the setting of 1992. I see no reason why it cannot be in that time, and no further benefit to keep it in modern day. With that now being set up, let's start telling the story. For you young would-be writers, we'll start this rewrite by looking at the hero's journey story wheel and use it as a guide. It is our goal to hit as many of these 8 points as possible when crafting the outline. It also should keep this video fairly short, as outlines can be as long or in rare cases longer than the actual script. Point 1. Our hero, in this case Jean, starts out in a place of comfort. So let's achieve that goal. The movie will open with Scott and Jean out to dinner, on a patio at a nice restaurant. This is a special date, perhaps an anniversary. We'll give our secondary character Scott a goal in this scene. He has to overcome his nerves and finally propose to Jean. We'll set up some flirtation, some comfort and trust between the two, and with a clever line, allude to Scott and Jean wanting the same thing, a commitment to each other through marriage. Perhaps an exchange in the realm of clinking wine glasses, celebrating 9 years together, and Jean adding, and many more. This also allows us to dip our toes into point number 2. Jean has a want. Part of that want is to take the next step in her relationship with Scott. Their date is interrupted when a group of radicals accost a mutant on the street. We'll call them the anti-mutant group. I'm drawing this situation based off the scene in Dark Phoenix where Charles prefers mutants being called superheroes instead of what they used to be called. This tells me that there was a form of racism towards mutants, and having a mob of radicals can show us this still being an issue. I'll show Jean and Scott as heroes by having them abruptly end their date to help the fellow mutant. The mob escalates to shooting them, and Jean uses her telekinetic powers to stop a bullet and yank the guns from their hands. Police arrive on the scene and arrest everyone, the mob and mutants alike. Raven, in human form, sorts things out at the police station, posting bail and releasing Jean, Scott, and the mutant. Raven offers sanctuary to the other mutant, but they refuse and vanish into the night. Jean is jaded against the officers for arresting them, arguing how can she feel safe and have a family if mutants are always going to be guilty until proven innocent. This now adds a second layer to point number 2. Jean wants mutants to be treated like humans. Having this become true will allow her to have the type of relationship she and Scott want for each other. This puts a hold on Scott's plan when Raven supports Jean's point of view. There is little time for them to dwell on the night's events when Charles urges them to return to the school for a mission. A solar flare has caused havoc aboard a shuttle that has departed from Skylab. The shuttle is spinning out of control and is in a decaying orbit. The crew is unconscious, and if the shuttle enters the atmosphere, it could break apart and the debris could strike populated areas. The President of the United States has asked for the X-Men to help. Point number 3. This puts Jean and her compatriots in an unfamiliar situation. The team is assembled. Raven will command, Hank will fly the jet to meet the shuttle, Kurt will teleport Jean, Storm, and Scott to rescue the astronauts. Scott will pilot the shuttle over the ocean to avoid civilian casualties. Jean and Storm will use their powers to stabilize the shuttle so it doesn't break apart during re-entry. Kurt will teleport the astronauts to the jet. When the shuttle is headed away from populated areas, Kurt will take Scott, Jean, and Snorn to the jet, and the day is saved. No need for Peter. He's barely in the movie as it is, so really, what's the point? That is the X-Men's plan, so let's throw a wrench into it so we can have Jean merge with this anomaly, as it is my understanding that this is what is going to be driving the story. This will allow us to bridge point 3 with point 4, adapting to the unfamiliar situation. We will draw from the movie the strange anomaly. This solar flare is approaching the shuttle. This will be one aspect of our ticking clock and a way to create urgency and stakes. The team gets aboard and Kurt is about to teleport the crew away when he feels faint and passes out. The flare is bombarding the ship with radiation. Storm and Scott are feeling sick. Jean uses her telekinetic powers to deflect the radiation. I pull this idea when the movie shows Jean surviving in outer space without a spacesuit. Plus, as a telekinetic, if she can manipulate things, she can manipulate atoms and should not have an issue protecting herself from radiation. We now have a new conflict and have escalated the stakes. Without Kurt, the team cannot get off the shuttle. Hank informs the team that if they get inside the shuttle's airlock, they'll be shielded from the radiation. Jean, Scott, and Storm move Kurt and the crew into the airlock, but if they're in the airlock, they cannot pilot the shuttle to land in the ocean. Scott volunteers to sacrifice himself to save the crew and his team. Jean won't have that. She loves Scott and says that she can survive the radiation and mentally link with Scott to pilot the shuttle. Charles, via telepathy, believes in Jean's plan and Scott acquiesces. Jean closes the airlock and gets in the pilot's seat. A mental projection of Scott sits next to her and he guides her actions to pilot the shuttle to safety. Jean's powers are split 3 ways. She's connecting with Scott, holding off the radiation, and mentally stabilizing the shuttle. Things are going well until the anomaly strikes the shuttle as it enters the atmosphere. The force of this entity is too great and Jean loses her connection with Scott. Scott tries to open the airlock door but Storm stops him. He could expose everyone to the radiation. Jean cannot hold off the radiation and the anomaly at the same time and fails. Charles loses his connection to Jean. The entity merges with Jean. She screams, trying to fight off the intrusion. The shuttle starts to burn up. Storm uses her powers to cool the shuttle and right its path, but she's having little effect. The shuttle is shaking violently, moments away from breaking apart, and then everything goes still. The anomaly vanishes into Jean. The shuttle flies towards New York and Hank follows in the jet. Scott opens the airlock to find Jean using her powers of telekinesis to land the shuttle at JFK. Spectators are amazed and praise the X-Men for their heroism. As the team departs the shuttle and boards the jet, the anti-mutant hate group chants offensive limericks and slogans at the X-Men. Some throw rocks, but Jean stops them mid-air. With a twitch of her lips, the mutant hate group's mouths are forced shut, silencing their slurs. The X-Men leave aboard their jet, and when they vanish into the sky, the hate group can open their mouths again, but remain speechless. At the school, Hank examines the team and finds that Jean's power is so great he cannot measure it with his current equipment. Scott does his boyfriend thing by showing concern for Jean and finally proposing to her. This takes us to point number 5. Jean gets one of the 2 things she wants. Charles and his X-Men also get what they want, with their actions celebrated by the people, minus the anti-mutant hate group. We can explore the opposite side of this with Raven and have her upset with Charles for putting her and the team in that position. Charles proclaims that mutants have the means to help and the responsibility to do so regardless of how humanity thinks of them. They are changing minds and building trust and acceptance in the world. Raven doesn't agree that they'll be treated like people, but instead tools to do their bidding. This allows us to allude to point number 6. With all of the new attention to the X-Men, what will happen to them and their cause if they fail? Jean has a nightmare reliving the anomaly encounter. Since in the actual movie, Scott refers to her name as Phoenix, and we see a flaming Phoenix fly in the end of the film, we will refer to this anomaly as the Phoenix just to keep things succinct. Also, let us try and make sense of those dumb scenes in the movie when Jean yells about stopping and quiet and all that empty fake conflict by making it clearer that these noises come directly from the Phoenix. We'll give the Phoenix words to say, to present an argument that is counter to what Charles has taught her. We'll have the Phoenix play off of the bigotry towards mutants and allude to the struggles having a relationship with Scott if action isn't taken, that mutants are feared and thought of as evil by the world. Jean, fighting the Phoenix and rejecting this line of thought, brings her physical pain, forcing her awake. Scott checks in on her, but Jean, not exactly sure if it was something real, plays it off as a very vivid dream. An award ceremony is held for the X-Men's recent heroics by the President. More of point number 5, getting what they want. The anti-mutant hate group crashes the ceremony and hurls rocks and other objects at the mutants. This triggers Jean, and she uses her telekinetic powers to catch the objects and throw them back at the hate group. This will be our third instance to hit home that the anti-mutant hate group are a common and frequent threat. This will also give our character of Jean an opportunity to escalate her own retaliation and show us her change from Jean to the Phoenix that other characters can witness. The hate group tries to run away, but she lifts them all off the ground and throws them into each other. This is where we hit point number 6. Pay a heavy price for what they want. We will see the results of this as the story progresses and things escalate. The more you are in the spotlight, the more susceptible you are to attack and criticism, and the closer you are looked at by the public. Charles and Scott urge Jean to stop this violent retaliation. The Secret Service draw their guns on the X-Men. Jean loses control and crushes the pistols in their hands. Charles manages to use his mind powers to stop Jean and get themselves to safety. The news channels constantly cover the ceremony aftermath, bringing up mutant trust and escalating the situation with crackpot theory and conjecture. At the school, Charles gathers Raven, Scott, and Hank to examine Jean as he detected an alien presence in her mind. He faces the Phoenix inside Jean's mind and tries to cast it out. Charles refuses to give up and draws on Jean's own power to fight the Phoenix, but the entity will not leave. The last option Charles has is to contain the Phoenix. He builds mental walls around it, but each one put up, the Phoenix tears down. The Phoenix takes over and casts out Charles. Jean rises from the examination table and glows as we saw in the actual film. Jean, channeling the Phoenix, proclaims that she is going to put a stop to all of the mutant hate, to accomplish the mission in a way she feels Charles should have done years ago. This is a callback to point number 2, getting the second thing that she wants. This is giving our Jean character a goal of revenge in response to the 3 anti-mutant scenes we have witnessed thus far, and also adds to point number 6, setting up consequences. Scott pleads with Jean to fight the Phoenix and stay with him. It doesn't work and Jean blasts through the school, flying into the night. They hop into the jet and go after Jean, finding her at an anti-mutant rally, thrashing everyone around her. The X-Men try to stop Jean, but with the Phoenix possessing her, she is too powerful. Jean's love for Scott manages to help her fight through the Phoenix long enough to end the fight and allow her to escape. The mutant hate group retaliates against the X-Men, claiming that they are the reason for this chaos. They retreat to the jet, but Raven stays behind. She uses this incident to further her point with Charles that mutants aren't ever going to be treated well, and that whatever is inside Jean is right for fighting back. Aboard the jet, Charles can no longer sense Jean to find her. Jean flies to a dockyard on the coast where she finds Raven waiting for her. We will connect these two by conveying that the Phoenix has used her telepathy to seek out trustworthy allies in her cause, and Raven, having an established relationship with Jean, draws the Phoenix to her. Raven offers a path for Jean to fight against those that hate them and to join her and an old friend that is leading the charge for mutant rights. The country is unnerved by these recent attacks by Jean. Her actions have inspired some mutants to fight back, causing chaos in the streets. Charles pleads with the president to not make any public statements against mutants and to allow him time to save Jean from this alien presence. The president wants to help Charles, but the country is frightened and the anti-mutant group is growing in favor and numbers with the people. If Charles cannot rescue Jean in 24 hours, the president will likely face impeachment for putting mutants above humans. This could lead to a loss in re-election to an opposing anti-mutant candidate. We will have a leader in particular who is anti-mutant hold a rally in Washington. His platform is to set back the movement for mutant equality by decades. This establishes stakes not just personally for the X-Men, but to all mutants and human relations. We have now escalated the story's consequences if our heroes fail. Jean flies herself and Raven to Eric's private island. Raven has Jean demonstrate her new powers and convince Eric that they are strong enough to strike against the anti-mutant movement. This takes us to our final act and set piece for the film. Jean, Raven, and Eric lead their mutants against the anti-mutant rally being held in Washington. Charles and the X-Men intervene to defend the humans. Scott calls out to Jean, wanting her back. The real Jean, fighting the Phoenix within her mind, manages to reach the surface, allowing her to see the carnage between humans and mutants and how Charles and the X-Men are there for her well-being. Charles uses his telepathy to bring Scott into Jean's mind. With Jean and Charles and Scott, the 3 of them have enough strength to fight the poisonous ideas the Phoenix is feeding her. This brings us to point number 7. Jean returns to her familiar situation, standing alongside the X-Men. She uses her telekinetic powers to stop the violence, freezing objects, debris, bullets, everything and everyone in place. All weapons drop to the ground. Jean separates the humans, Eric and Raven's mutants, and the X-Men into 3 groups. She gives an impassioned speech about how it is easy to fight each other based on our differences instead of uniting together based on our similarities. What mutants and humans have in common that make them stronger together is the ability to love. This is a first idea just to hammer home a point, not necessarily going to be in the final project. She expresses her love for Scott, her dreams for a life and a family. She asks if hate is worth risking their lives over. She apologizes for the harm she has caused and how they are counter to the lessons Charles has taught her. She encourages all sides to not abandon all that they have accomplished towards accepting each other. The Phoenix attempts to retake Jean's body. Jean holds it off, says her goodbyes to Scott, and flies into space, exploding into a fiery phoenix. Everyone regains control of their body. Scott calls out for Jean. Taking us finally to point number 8, having changed. Yes, Jean is technically dead, and yes, that is a change, but this part not only affects Jean, but it has a ripple effect to the rest of the characters. The anti-mutant group is about to attack when some of their own members stand between the mutants and the group. Charles uses the anti-mutant dissenters to show Raven and Eric how minds can be changed and enlightened. Eric retreats with his mutants. Raven rejects Charles, citing that had they not saved those astronauts in the first place and just lived their lives and not play hero, none of these events would have happened. Raven goes her own way. Later, Hank finds Charles sitting in the Cerebro chamber, exhausted. He has been searching for Jean for days with no success. Hank suggests that he help the students that need him here, so if Jean does come back, it is to a home that is strong and safe and welcoming. We end the movie on a hopeful message. Charles has dedicated himself to his students and encourages them to stand together and to continue the good fight for mutant rights and equality all around. Oh, look at that. The movie has been out for only a week, and I have just told you a 4.5-page outline that gives you a far more concise story than what was released at midnight of June 7, 2019. This outline, using only the original movie as reference, managed to put Jean in a plausible situation to get her new powers, show an escalation, and danger in being driven by those powers. We didn't waste time with her parents' death or with aliens we know nothing about. We showed a logical, emotional response to hate, showed a cause for a character's dangerous actions that are counter to her upbringing, showed a conflict in ideology where people who want the same thing go about it in different ways, showed how society can overreact to violent events without thinking of the consequences, raised the stakes for our characters through these actions. If Jean stays bad, all mutants and humans could suffer. If Jean returns to the side of good, hope still remains. And we showed how caring and compassion can save people. This is just the first draft outline. There's plenty of room to explore other aspects of the story. We can elaborate the anti-mutant hate group. We can introduce that adversary politician to challenge the president and mutant rights earlier in the film. But what is important is that we have crafted a solid structure to add, experiment, and refine. This is the type of method that writers use not only when rewriting the scripts, but when crafting it initially. To think, XMenDarkPhoenix underwent lots of reshoots and was put on hold from fall of 2018 to the summer of 2019, and they still couldn't deliver a cohesive story. What was happening during that time? The story issues with Dark Phoenix are not with the cast or the crew, they're with the script. The original writing that kicked off this movie. Had Simon Kinberg took more time with the story, consulted with someone like me, the script doctor, all of these issues could have been greatly reduced or avoided altogether. Perhaps next time, when these studios invest in a mega-budget movie, they'll hire me, the script doctor, to take a look at their story before they start production and make sure they don't end up with another Dark Phoenix disappointment again. Having watched this film and done my outline rewrite, I find that this Dark Phoenix story feels larger than a single movie. This may not be a story best told in a feature film series, but rather an hour-long TV series where this world and these characters can be better explored. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. If you have more to add or revise to this outline, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.